Ladies and gentlemen, most people believe that life responds to effort, struggle, and constant action. They are taught that if something has not arrived yet, it must be chased harder, planned more carefully, or worried into existence. Yet the deepest truth about life operates in the opposite direction. When the mind relaxes, when inner tension dissolves, and when the heart becomes calm, life begins to rearrange itself effortlessly. Most people underestimate the importance of inner stillness because they confuse it with inactivity or weakness. In reality, inner stillness is one of the most powerful states a human mind can enter. It is the condition in which mental noise quiets down, emotional turbulence settles, and awareness becomes clear. When the mind is still, it stops reacting to fear-based impulses and begins responding from understanding. This shift alone changes how life unfolds. Inner stillness is not something that needs to be created. It already exists beneath layers of habitual thinking. Thoughts of worry, urgency, self-doubt, and overanalysis act like surface waves on water. When the waves are strong, the reflection is distorted. When the water becomes calm, everything becomes visible and accurate. In the same way, a still mind reflects reality clearly and allows intelligent decisions and natural outcomes to emerge without strain. Resistance is the true obstacle in life, not lack of effort or ability. Resistance is created internally when the mind insists that something must happen immediately, must look a certain way, or must be controlled through force. This mental tension sends a continuous signal of dissatisfaction and urgency. The body responds by remaining in a state of stress, and stress narrows perception. When perception is narrowed, opportunities are missed, intuition is ignored, and creativity is blocked. Inner stillness dissolves resistance by removing the illusion that everything depends on constant effort. When the mind relaxes, it no longer treats life as an emergency. This relaxed state allows a deeper intelligence to operate, one that sees connections, timing, and solutions beyond conscious reasoning. Many breakthroughs occur not during moments of intense thinking, but during moments of calm, while resting, walking, or simply letting go of the problem. Stillness also changes the way the subconscious mind responds. The subconscious is highly sensitive to emotional tone rather than words. When the emotional environment is tense, rushed, or fearful, the subconscious interprets that as a signal of danger or lack. When the emotional environment is calm and assured, it interprets that as safety and fulfillment. Inner stillness communicates to the subconscious that there is no threat, no urgency, and no need to defend or struggle. This creates internal coherence, which then reflects externally. Another important aspect of inner stillness is that it restores trust in natural processes. Modern thinking often glorifies constant action, multitasking, and relentless effort, yet nature itself operates through cycles of rest and movement. Growth does not happen continuously, it happens in phases. Seeds grow underground in silence before breaking the surface. Inner stillness is the psychological equivalent of this hidden phase of growth. It allows unseen processes to develop without interference. When the mind becomes still, emotional reactions lose their grip. Situations that once triggered anxiety or frustration no longer dominate attention. This emotional neutrality does not mean indifference. It means clarity. From clarity, responses become intentional rather than reactive. Decisions made from stillness tend to be aligned with long-term benefit rather than short-term. Relief. Inner stillness also enhances receptivity. A tense mind is closed, defensive, and selective. A still mind is open and inclusive. Opportunities often arrive subtly, through casual conversations, unexpected ideas, or intuitive nudges. These signals are easily missed when the mind is loud. Stillness sharpens awareness, allowing one to notice what was previously overlooked. There is also a physiological dimension to inner stillness. When mental agitation decreases, the nervous system shifts from a stress-dominant state to a restorative one. Breathing slows, muscles relax, and the body exits survival mode. This physical relaxation further reinforces mental calm, creating a feedback loop. In this state, creativity increases, problem-solving improves, and emotional regulation becomes easier. Inner stillness does not require withdrawing from responsibilities or avoiding challenges. It changes the inner posture with which challenges are approached. Instead of confronting life as a battle, stillness allows engagement from balance. Actions taken from this state tend to be efficient rather than exhausting. Less effort produces greater results because energy is no longer wasted on resistance. One of the most misunderstood aspects of inner stillness is that it does not eliminate desire. Desire remains, but it becomes lighter. It no longer feels desperate or urgent. When desire is held in stillness, it transforms into intention. Intention is calm, focused, and steady. Unlike craving, which demands immediate satisfaction, intention trusts timing and process, stillness also breaks the habit of constant mental rehearsal of negative outcomes. Many people repeatedly imagine what could go wrong without realizing that this mental activity reinforces fear. When the mind rests in stillness, these repetitive patterns lose momentum. Silence interrupts habitual thinking and creates space for new assumptions to form. With regular practice, inner stillness becomes a default state rather than a temporary escape. Life may still present challenges, but the internal response remains stable. This stability creates confidence, not because everything is controlled, but because the individual trusts their ability to remain grounded regardless of circumstances. Inner stillness is a form of alignment. It aligns thought, emotion, and expectation into a coherent state. From this coherence, life flows more smoothly. Effort is replaced by ease, force by allowance, and anxiety by quiet confidence. When the mind is still, it stops obstructing the natural movement of life. This is why inner stillness is not merely a mental practice, but a foundational principle for allowing outcomes to unfold effortlessly. Forcing is often mistaken for determination, but the two operate from very different psychological foundations. Determination arises from clarity and confidence, while forcing emerges from fear and impatience. When someone forces an outcome, they are acting from the belief that something is not happening fast enough or may not happen at all, lest they intervene aggressively. This belief alone creates internal pressure, and that pressure becomes the very reason progress feels blocked. The mind under pressure narrows its focus. It becomes obsessed with results rather than process, with control rather than alignment. In this state, every delay is interpreted as failure, every obstacle as proof that something is wrong. This constant evaluation keeps the nervous system in a heightened state of alert. Instead of responding intelligently to situations, the mind reacts defensively, often making choices that create more complications than solutions. When effort is driven by urgency, it loses effectiveness. Actions taken from a stressed state are usually rushed, emotionally RGE'd, and inconsistent. They may appear productive on the surface, but they lack coherence. One step contradicts the next. Decisions are revised repeatedly. Energy is spent correcting mistakes that arise from haste. Over time, this cycle exhausts both mental and emotional resources, making progress feel heavier rather than smoother. Forcing also interferes with timing. Many outcomes depend not just on personal action, but on external conditions aligning, other people's decisions, environmental factors, or sequences that cannot be rushed. When someone tries to override timing, they often encounter resistance. Doors that would have opened naturally with patience remain closed under pressure. Opportunities that required subtle awareness are missed because the mind is too busy pushing. Another hidden cost of forcing is that it reinforces the belief in lack. Every attempt to force carries the underlying message, "What I want is not here yet." Repeating this message internally strengthens the assumption of absence. The subconscious mind responds to repeated emotional signals, not logical arguments. If the emotional tone is anxious and urgent, the subconscious interprets that as confirmation that fulfillment is distant. This internal contradiction delays resolution. Overthinking is a common companion of forcing. The mind revisits the same scenarios repeatedly, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. While planning has its place, excessive mental activity creates confusion rather than clarity. The more the mind analyzes from a place of fear, the more variables it generates. Instead of simplifying the path forward, overthinking multiplies obstacles. When someone stops forcing, it does not mean they stop caring. It means they shift from tension to trust. This shift changes the quality of attention. Attention becomes broader, more flexible, and more creative. Ideas surface spontaneously. Solutions appear without deliberate effort. This is not coincidence, it is the result of the mind exiting survival mode and entering a receptive state. Letting go of force also restores emotional balance. Emotional stability is often mistaken for passivity, but in reality it is a position of strength. A calm emotional state allows for discernment. One can distinguish between actions that are necessary and actions that are driven by anxiety. This discernment prevents wasted effort and preserves energy for moments that truly require action. Forcing creates friction in relationships as well. When expectations are pushed onto others, resistance naturally arises. Communication becomes strained, and cooperation diminishes. In contrast, when expectations are relaxed and trust replaces pressure, interactions become smoother. People are more willing to engage, support, and collaborate when they do not feel controlled or rushed. The paradox is that progress accelerates when force is removed. This happens because alignment replaces struggle. Alignment means actions are taken at the right time, with the right mindset, and in the right direction. These actions may be fewer, but they are more impactful. Instead of moving sideways through frantic effort, momentum builds steadily. Releasing force also allows intuition to guide decisions. Intuition cannot be accessed when the mind is noisy and tense. It speaks softly, often as a subtle sense of knowing rather than a loud thought. When force subsides, this inner guidance becomes audible. Decisions made from intuition tend to feel natural and timely, reducing the need for constant correction. Another reason forcing delays results is that it keeps attention fixed on the gap between current circumstances and desired outcomes. This gap becomes emotionally charged. The more attention it receives, the more real it feels. When tension shifts away from the gap and toward calm expectation, the emotional charge dissolves. Without emotional charge, the sense of waiting disappears, and life begins to move forward more fluidly. There is also a lesson in humility within the act of releasing force. It acknowledges that not everything can or should be controlled. This acknowledgement is not defeat, it is wisdom. It allows cooperation with processes larger than individual will. When this cooperation replaces control, outcomes often exceed original expectations. Consistency improves when force is removed. Forced effort is difficult to sustain. It leads to burnout and discouragement. Relaxed effort, guided by clarity, can be maintained over time. This steady engagement produces compounding results that frantic bursts of activity cannot achieve. Forcing delays results because it is rooted in distrust. Distrust in timing, in process, and in oneself. When trust replaces force, the internal environment changes. The mind becomes clear, the body relaxes, and actions align naturally with opportunity. In this state, progress no longer feels like a struggle. It feels like a continuation of something already in motion, unfolding at its own intelligent pace. What a person consistently assumes to be true operates quietly beneath conscious thought, shaping perception, behavior, and experience. Assumptions are not loud declarations, they are silent agreements the mind makes with itself about how life works and what is possible. These agreements determine how situations are interpreted long before any logical analysis occurs. Because they function below awareness, assumptions often go unquestioned, yet they exert a powerful influence over outcomes. The mind does not distinguish sharply between what is imagined, expected, or remembered when emotional conviction is present, when an assumption is held with emotional cert. The nervous system responds as if it is already true. This response alters posture, tone of voice, facial expression, and decision-making patterns. These subtle shifts affect how others respond, how opportunities are noticed, and how circumstances unfold. Reality begins to reorganize around the assumed state without conscious effort. Assumptions shape perception by filtering information. The mind constantly receives vast amounts of sensory data, but it only notices what aligns with its expectations. When someone assumes progress is difficult, they notice obstacles. When someone assumes things work out, they notice solutions. Both individuals may encounter the same circumstances, yet their experiences differ dramatically because attention is guided by underlying belief rather than objective reality. Emotional consistency is what gives assumptions their creative power. A fleeting positive thought has little effect if it is contradicted by a persistent emotional pattern. The subconscious responds to repetition and feeling. When an assumption is maintained long enough to feel natural, it becomes the default reference point. From that point forward, thoughts, reactions, and choices automatically align with it. Many people unknowingly reinforce unwanted assumptions through internal dialogue. Statements such as "this always takes too long," "nothing ever works for me," or "I'll believe it when I see it seem harmless," yet they continuously affirm delay and difficulty. Over time, these affirmations harden into identity-level beliefs. Once something is accepted as just how life is, it no longer feels like a belief, it feels like fact. Changing assumptions does not require fighting old beliefs directly. Resistance strengthens them. Instead, it involves gently introducing a new perspective and allowing it to settle. The key is familiarity, not force. When a new assumption is repeated calmly and without emotional strain, it gradually becomes believable. Once it feels believable, it begins to feel true. At that point, the subconscious accepts it without resistance. Assumption works most effectively when it is aligned with emotional neutrality or ease. Overly enthusiastic attempts to convince oneself often backfire because they reveal inner doubt. Calm acceptance is more powerful than intense effort. When the mind says, "this is just how it is now," without drama or urgency, the nervous system relaxes, signaling internal agreement. Behavior naturally follows assumption. If someone assumes success is inevitable, they take risks differently. They speak with more confidence, wait with less anxiety, and recover from setbacks more quickly. These behavioral changes are not deliberate strategies. They are spontaneous expressions of inner certainty. Over time, these expressions accumulate into tangible results. Assumptions also influence how time is perceived. When someone assumes something will take a long time, waiting feels heavy and frustrating. When someone assumes timing will work out, waiting feels lighter or may not even register as waiting at all. This shift in perception reduces psychological stress and keeps attention in the present rather than fixated on absence. Another subtle aspect of assumption is that it governs emotional reactions before conscious thought intervenes. Emotional responses often appear automatic because they are generated by deeper beliefs. When an assumption changes, emotional reactions change as well. Situations that once triggered anxiety may no longer provoke the same response because the underlying interpretation has shifted. Assumption does not eliminate external challenges, but it changes how challenges are engaged. Instead of being seen as obstacles, they are seen as transitional steps. This reframing reduces emotional resistance and preserves momentum. The individual remains mentally flexible rather than rigidly focused on a single path. It is important to understand that assumption is not wishful thinking. Wishful thinking acknowledges doubt. Assumption bypasses doubt by operating from quiet acceptance. There is no inner debate when an assumption is truly held. It does not require constant reinforcement. It simply feels natural. The process of adopting a new assumption often includes a period of internal adjustment. Old patterns may resurface temporarily, especially under stress. This does not indicate failure. It indicates that the nervous system is recalibrating. Returning gently to the desired assumption without self-criticism allows the new state to stabilize. Assumptions also shape self-concept. How someone views their worth, competence, and identity influences every area of life. When self-concept shifts, external circumstances tend to follow. A person who assumes they are capable behaves differently than one who assumes they must struggle to prove themselves. This difference is visible and impactful, even if it is not consciously noticed. The most effective assumptions are simple and general. Broad assumptions such as "things work out for me" or "I am supported" allow flexibility in how outcomes manifest. Specific assumptions can be useful, but general ones reduce pressure and resistance. They create a stable emotional foundation rather than a narrow focus. Assumption creates reality because it establishes the lens through which life is experienced. Change the lens, and the picture changes. This process does not require control over external events. It requires consistency in internal agreement. When the inner agreement stabilizes, outer circumstances gradually align, often in ways that feel natural rather than forced. Faith is commonly misunderstood as something that must be proven through action, effort, or constant reassurance. Many people believe that if they are not actively doing something, worrying about something, or repeatedly affirming something, then they are not being faithful enough. In reality, genuine faith expresses itself as inner calm. It is not loud, restless, or demanding. It is quiet, settled, and emotionally steady. Faith is not what you do with your hands, it is the state your mind rests in. A useful way to understand faith is to observe how certainty feels in everyday life. When you are certain the sun will rise tomorrow, you do not think about it repeatedly, remind yourself of it, or anxiously check the sky. You do not take action to make it happen. Your certainty is so natural that the matter never enters your emotional space. This is how true faith operates. It removes urgency from the mind. It does not require constant mental activity because it assumes completion. When faith is treated as an action, it becomes exhausting. People try to force belief through repetition, emotional intensity, or visible effort. This often produces the opposite effect, because excessive effort reveals inner doubt. The mind senses contradiction. If something were truly trusted, there would be no need to struggle so hard to believe it. This inner conflict creates tension, and tension is a signal of uncertainty rather than faith. Faith as a mental state is characterized by emotional neutrality, combined with positive expectation. There is no desperation in it. There is no need to convince others or even oneself. It simply feels settled. The nervous system reflects this settlement by relaxing. Breathing becomes natural, thoughts slow down, and the body exits a state of alert. This physiological shift is important because the subconscious mind responds more to bodily and emotional cues than to verbal statements. 1. Of the clearest signs that faith has become a mental state rather than an action is the absence of constant checking. When someone truly trusts an outcome, they stop monitoring its progress obsessively. They no longer feel the urge to ask repeatedly whether it is working or when it will happen. This does not mean they stop caring, it means care has transformed into expectation. Expectation is calm, while worry is restless. Faith does not eliminate thinking, but it changes the quality of thought. Thoughts arising from faith are fewer and simpler. They are not argumentative or defensive. They do not need to justify themselves. In contrast, thoughts arising from doubt tend to be repetitive and circular. They revisit the same questions without resolution. When faith is present, the mind does not chase answers. It rests in trust. Another important distinction is that faith as a mental state does not depend on external evidence. If it did, it would not be faith, it would be reaction. Faith operates independently of appearances. This does not mean ignoring reality or denying facts, but it does mean refusing to let temporary conditions dictate inner certainty. A calm inner state can coexist with unresolved circumstances without feeling threatened by them. Faith also reshapes how time is experienced. When faith is absent, waiting feels heavy. Time feels slow and every delay feels personal. When faith is present, time loses emotional charge. Waiting becomes neutral or even unnoticed. This is because the mind no longer treats the future as uncertain or dangerous. It trusts the unfolding process, so attention naturally returns to the present moment. Many people confuse faith with optimism, but they are not the same. Optimism hopes things will work out. Faith expects they will. Hope still contains uncertainty. Faith does not. This difference is subtle but powerful. Hope often requires reassurance, while faith remains steady even in silence. Faith does not need constant stimulation to survive. Faith as a mental state also influences behavior indirectly. Actions taken from faith are not frantic or forced. They are measured, timely, and appropriate. There is no rush to act simply to reduce anxiety. Instead, action arises naturally when it is needed. This leads to efficiency. because energy is not wasted on unnecessary or premature effort. One of the most transformative aspects of faith is that it dissolves inner conflict. Inner conflict arises when one part of the mind wants an outcome, while another part fears disappointment. Faith resolves this conflict by removing fear from the equation. When fear subsides, desire becomes lighter and more flexible. The mind no longer pulls itself in opposite directions. Faith also reduces emotional dependency on outcomes. When someone lacks faith, their emotional state rises and falls based on external progress. Good news brings relief, delays bring distress. When faith is established as a mental state, emotional stability increases. The individual remains centered regardless of short-term fluctuations. This stability itself often improves outcomes because clear thinking replaces reactive behavior. It is important to note that faith does not mean suppressing negative emotions. Suppression creates resistance. Instead, faith allows emotions to arise without attaching meaning to them. A moment of doubt does not destroy faith any more than a passing cloud eliminates the sky. Faith is the broader mental atmosphere, not the absence of all negative thoughts. Developing faith as a mental state is not about effort, it is about familiarity. The mind becomes comfortable with an idea through repeated, relaxed exposure. When a desired outcome is imagined calmly and without urgency, it gradually feels normal. Once it feels normal, the mind no longer questions it. This normalization is the foundation of faith. Another key feature of faith is patience without strain. Patience rooted in doubt feels like endurance. Patience rooted in faith feels natural. There is no sense of sacrifice or waiting through difficulty. The mind simply assumes that timing will align, so there is nothing to fight against. Faith also alters self-perception. A person who operates from faith sees themselves as supported rather than alone, capable rather than struggling, guided rather than lost. This shift in self-concept influences every interaction. Confidence becomes quieter but stronger. There is less need for validation, approval, or reassurance from others. When faith is misunderstood as action, people often burn out. They mistake exhaustion for dedication and anxiety for commitment. Faith as a mental state restores balance. It allows effort to be applied only where it is effective and rest to be embraced without guilt. This balance is sustainable and empowering. Faith is the absence of inner resistance. It is the decision, often unconscious, that life does not need to be fought. When resistance fades, cooperation with life begins. Circumstances may not change instantly, but the inner experience does, and that inner change gradually reorganizes outer conditions. Faith does not shout that everything will work out. It quietly assumes it, and in that quiet assumption, the mind relaxes, the body softens, and life is allowed to unfold without interference. Letting go is often misunderstood as a form of loss, resignation, or emotional detachment from what matters. Many people fear that if they stop thinking about something, stop pushing for it, or stop emotionally gripping it, they will lose it altogether. This misunderstanding creates resistance to letting go, even when holding on is clearly creating stress. In truth, letting go has nothing to do with giving up desire. It has everything to do with releasing the tension that surrounds desire. Desire itself is natural. It arises from curiosity, growth, and the instinct to expand. What causes suffering is not desire, but attachment to control. Attachment insists that an outcome must arrive in a specific way, at a specific time, and under specific conditions. This insistence creates pressure. Letting go means releasing this pressure, not abandoning the desire. The intention remains, but the emotional grip softens. Giving up feels heavy. It carries disappointment, defeat, and withdrawal of energy. Letting go feels lighter. It carries acceptance, trust, and emotional ease. These two states may look similar on the surface. Both involve less effort, but they are internally opposite. One is rooted in despair, the other in confidence. The difference is not in behavior, but in emotional posture. When someone truly gives up, hope collapses, motivation fades, interest disappears. When someone lets go, hope becomes quieter but more stable. Motivation becomes calmer and more sustainable. Interest remains, but it no longer feels urgent. This distinction is critical because the subconscious mind responds to emotional tone, not intellectual explanations. Letting go signals safety, giving up signals loss. Control is often a disguised form of fear. The desire to control outcomes usually comes from the belief that if one does not manage every detail, something will go wrong. This belief keeps the nervous system in a state of vigilance. Letting go relaxes this vigilance. It acknowledges that not everything can or should be controlled, and that outcomes can unfold intelligently without constant supervision. One reason letting go is so difficult is that identity becomes entangled with outcomes. People unconsciously attach their sense of worth, competence, or security to specific results. Letting go then feels like risking identity itself. Recognizing this attachment allows it to loosen. When self-worth is separated from outcomes, letting go becomes easier because there is less at stake emotionally. Letting go also requires tolerance for uncertainty. The mind prefers predictability even if it is unpleasant. Uncertainty feels threatening because it removes the illusion of control. Yet uncertainty is also where possibility exists. Letting go opens space for outcomes that could not have been planned or predicted. This openness allows creativity and flexibility to emerge. Another important aspect of letting go is emotional completion. Many people hold on because emotions have not been fully felt or processed. Suppressed frustration, disappointment, or fear can keep the mind attached to a situation. Letting go does not mean bypassing these emotions. It means allowing them to be acknowledged without judgment. Once emotions are fully felt, attachment often dissolves naturally. Letting go changes how the mind relates to effort. Effort is no longer driven by anxiety, but by clarity. Actions become choices rather than compulsions. This shift improves effectiveness because energy is not scattered. The individual acts when action is appropriate and rests when rest is appropriate, without guilt or fear. There is also a timing element to letting go. Many outcomes require a period of gestation. Constant interference disrupts this process. Letting go respects timing without resentment. It does not demand immediate results to validate patience. Instead, it trusts that progress can be occurring invisibly. Letting go does not mean emotional numbness. Emotions continue to arise, but they are not clung to. Experiences pass through awareness rather than becoming fixed. This fluidity reduces suffering and increases resilience. Setbacks are processed and released rather than stored and replayed. The ability to let go strengthens emotional independence. When emotional well-being is no longer tied to specific outcomes, inner stability increases. This stability is not indifference, it is groundedness. From this grounded state, engagement with life becomes healthier and more balanced. Letting go also improves relationships. When expectations are relaxed, interactions feel less strained. People sense when they are being emotionally pressured, even if nothing is said. Letting go removes this pressure, allowing connections to develop organically. Communication becomes clearer, and conflict decreases. Another subtle benefit of letting go is increased self-trust. By releasing control, the individual learns that they can handle uncertainty and change. This builds confidence over time. Each experience of letting go without negative consequences weakens the belief that control is necessary for safety. Letting go allows desire to evolve. Sometimes what is released is not the desire itself, but the form it was expected to take. This flexibility opens the door to outcomes that may be more aligned than the original plan. When attachment is rigid, growth is limited. When attachment softens, growth expands. The process of letting go is often gradual. It does not require a dramatic decision. It happens in moments, choosing not to check again, choosing not to replay a conversation, choosing not to force clarity. Each small release reduces overall tension. Over time, the accumulated effect is significant. Letting go is not a one-time act. It is a practice. The mind may return to control under stress, and that is natural. Each time awareness returns, control can be released again without self-criticism. Gentleness is essential. Harsh Self-judgment reinforces attachment by creating another problem to manage, letting go without G. Giving up ultimately means trusting that life does not need to be coerced. It means recognizing that effort and ease are not opposites, but partners. Effort applied without tension is powerful. Ease without avoidance is healthy. Letting go integrates both. When tension dissolves, desire becomes lighter, clearer, and more aligned. The individual is no longer fighting life or withdrawing from it. They are participating without strain. In this state, outcomes are not chased or resisted. They are allowed. Letting go is not the absence of care. It is the absence of fear in caring. And in that absence, life has room to respond. Living from the end result is a shift in inner orientation rather than a technique or strategy. It means allowing the mind and emotional state to settle into the feeling of completion before any visible evidence appears. This does not involve pretending or denying current circumstances. Instead, it involves choosing which inner state is treated as real and authoritative. When the inner state reflects fulfillment, the outer experience gradually reorganizes to match it. The mind naturally seeks coherence. When there is a gap between inner expectation and outer reality, tension arises. Most people respond to this tension by trying to change the outer conditions first. Living from the end reverses this approach. It addresses the inner state first, allowing external change to follow. This reversal feels unfamiliar at first because it contradicts habitual thinking, but it is deeply intuitive once experienced. Emotional alignment is central to this process. Emotions are not random reactions, they are signals about perceived reality. When someone feels relief, satisfaction, or calm confidence, the nervous system behaves as if the desired outcome is already secure. This physiological response influences perception, behavior, and interaction with the environment. Key: the body does not wait for proof, it responds to assumption. Living from the end does not mean constantly visualizing or mentally rehearsing the desired outcome. Excessive visualization can create strain if it is driven by urgency. Instead, it involves allowing a general sense of completion to become familiar. This familiarity is what makes the state natural rather than forced. Once the feeling becomes normal, it no longer requires maintenance. Common mistake is confusing living from the end with ignoring practical reality. In truth, practical action continues, but its motivation changes. Actions are no longer taken to make something happen, but to express alignment with what is assumed to be true. This subtle shift removes desperation from effort. Work becomes calmer and more effective because it is no longer fueled by fear of failure. Living from the end also alters internal dialogue. Instead of asking, "How will this happen?" the mind naturally asks, "What is the next appropriate step?" Change reduces mental noise. The focus moves from controlling outcomes to responding intelligently in the present moment. This responsiveness allows for flexibility and adaptation. One of the most significant effects of living from the end is the reduction of emotional dependency on external validation. When fulfillment is assumed internally, approval and reassurance become less necessary. The individual becomes more self-contained emotionally. This independence is often perceived by others as confidence or stability. There is also a timing aspect to living from the end. When the end result is emotionally accepted, waiting loses its emotional weight. Time no longer feels like an obstacle. This does not mean impatience disappears entirely, but it no longer dominates awareness. The present moment becomes sufficient rather than merely a bridge to the future. Living from the end requires honesty about emotional state. It is not helpful to force feelings that are not present. Instead, it involves gently guiding attention toward what relief would feel like if the outcome were resolved. Relief is often more accessible than excitement. Calmness is often more sustainable than joy. These subtle emotions are powerful because they are believable. The mind resists what feels unrealistic. Therefore, living from the end works best when the assumed state feels reasonable. This does not mean limiting ambition, but it does mean choosing assumptions that the nervous system can accept without triggering anxiety. Gradual shifts are often more effective than dramatic ones. Another important element is consistency without obsession. Living from the end does not require constant monitoring of inner state. Once the feeling of completion is established, it can be allowed to fade into the background. Just as someone who owns a home does not think about ownership constantly, someone living from the end does not dwell on fulfillment continuously. It is simply known. Living from the end also changes how setbacks are interpreted. Instead of being seen as evidence that the assumption is wrong, they are seen as temporary adjustments. This interpretation prevents emotional collapse and preserves alignment. The individual remains oriented toward completion rather than derailed by process. Self-concept plays a crucial role. Living from the end often involves adopting the identity of someone for whom the desired outcome is normal. This identity shift influences choices and boundaries. A person who sees success as normal behaves differently than someone who sees it as rare. This behavior reinforces the assumed state without conscious effort. There is also an ethical dimension to living from the end. When fulfillment is assumed internally, there is less temptation to manipulate or control others. The need to force outcomes through external means diminishes. Interactions become more respectful and cooperative because there is less internal pressure to extract results. Living from the end does not guarantee a specific timeline. It guarantees a specific inner quality. That quality, calm certainty, creates the conditions for intelligent action and receptive awareness. Outcomes tend to arrive through natural sequences rather than dramatic interventions. The practice of living from the end becomes easier with repetition. Each experience of internal alignment followed by external confirmation strengthens trust. Over time, the individual becomes less reactive to appearances and more grounded in inner stability. It is important to acknowledge that the mind may occasionally revert to old patterns under stress. This is not failure. Returning to the feeling of completion gently and without judgment allows alignment to be restored. Harsh self-correction creates resistance, gentle. Ines restores ease. Living from the end ultimately transforms the relationship with desire. Desire becomes an invitation rather than a demand. It guides attention without creating suffering. Fulfillment is not postponed to the future. It is experienced as an inner state in the present. When the end is lived internally, the journey becomes lighter. Effort is no longer burdened by fear. Action flows naturally from clarity. Waiting becomes neutral. And life, no longer resisted, responds with its own intelligence. Living from the end is not about controlling reality. It is about cooperating with it from a place of inner completion. The essence of this message is simple, yet deeply transformative. Life does not respond to tension, force, or constant effort. It responds to inner alignment. When the mind relaxes, resistance dissolves. When resistance dissolves, the natural flow of life is restored. Everything discussed in this speech points back to one fundamental truth. Your inner state is the starting point of every experience. Stillness opens the door. Releasing force removes delay. Assumption shapes perception. Faith stabilizes the mind. Letting go frees energy. Living from the end aligns emotion with fulfillment. None of these principles require struggle. They require awareness, trust, and a willingness to stop interfering with fear. You were never meant to chase life. What is meant for you moves toward you when you stop standing in its way. Calm expectation is more powerful than anxious effort. Quiet confidence creates faster movement than desperate action. When you rest in the feeling of completion, life reorganizes itself to reflect that inner truth. The invitation is not to do more, but to relax deeper, to trust timing, to allow clarity to replace urgency, to let inner certainty guide action instead of fear. When you do this, effort becomes effective, waiting becomes peaceful, and outcomes unfold naturally. Relax. Everything is already in motion. Your calm acceptance is the final signal life is waiting for.